So let's move on to the Pacific Division, where things are going to get very interesting over the course of the season. So the Flames finished first last year. They lost Johnny Gaudreau in free agency. They traded away Matthew Tkachuk. That alone sounds terrible. But then you factor in the return they got for Tkachuk was Jonathan freaking Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar on top of 2 draft picks, if I remember correctly. So first off, they cleaned the hell up in that trade. And late into free agency, they signed Nazem Kadri. That is extremely good damage control, if you could even call it that at that point. I mean, that was kind of like a lateral movement. That was like the greatest lateral movement of all time. What are your thoughts on that?
Done. Yeah, well done by Brad Treliving. And you know what? I'll just add on top of what you're saying. Huberdeau was signed to an extension. Weegar today was signed to an extension as well. So both of those players are sticking around in Calgary for the long term. And, you know, the public sentiment after Brad Treliving brought those 2 players in was that that's great. Huberdeau's great. Mackenzie Weegar is a young up-and-coming defenseman. Okay. But Gaudreau didn't want to stay in Calgary. Tkachuk didn't want to stay in Calgary. What makes you think these guys are going to want to stay? Well, that has just been thrown completely out the window. Weegar wants to stay. Huberdeau wants to stay. And there's also one other person who wants to stay, and that's Daryl Sutter. And as long as you have all 3 of those in their respective positions doing what they do, I think the Flames will be just fine. Now I will lock them in for a playoff spot. I'm not going to say that they're going to win the Pacific, but I think that they'll be in the top 3. I'm going to put them at second.
Interesting. I actually
around that. And I have a very team at number 1, so we'll get to that.
I have a feeling I know who you have at number 1, but I'm actually going to put them remaining at the number 1 spot because I like their defense probably the most in this entire division. And looking at, I do like their defense out of everyone in this division because Hannafin's good. Rasmus Anderson's very good. They just got Weegar. Kylington or Shillington, whichever one you feel like calling him. I always find that fascinating because they seemingly switch it from game to game. And Valimaki is a 24-year-old who's still developing. Markstrom is very good in net. And like we said, Huberdeau and Kadri, they still have Andrew Mangiapane, who is very good. Elias Lindholm, very good. Dylan Dubé, very good for a middle 6 forward. I mean, they just a solid team. And I'm pretty sure, like you said, Sutter's sticking around. I'm 99% sure I got a notification earlier that he signed an extension. So This is still a very good team. And this is just my opinion. I think they're going to finish first again because of the phenomenal damage control that they did.
And Shades, I can absolutely see them finishing first, without a doubt. I just like to be a little risky with my preseason. But again, that's risky too, because at the time of the Tkachuk trade, if you were to have come out and said that the Flames were going to win the division, I think some hockey fans will be looking at you like you had 2 heads. So, look, I like the pick. I like Calgary. They're a complete team. You also didn't mention Chris Tanev as well on the back end. He's a top 4 defenseman. So, I mean, they got a really solid team. I like Markstrom as well. A lot of people forget that he was a Vezina candidate too. Didn't have the greatest playoffs, but, during the regular season, he was really solid back there. So I definitely think that they will be second or third, but I'll go second. And I won't be surprised if they finish first. I really won't.
All right, so you got them second, I got them first. Let's move on to the team that finished second last year, who, spoiler alert, I have them finishing second in the division again, the Edmonton Oilers. I was actually listening to Steve Dangle's podcast, and he brought up a very interesting point. McDavid is, what did he say, 26 or 25?
I believe he's 24. Might be 25.
Oh, dear Lord. No, he's 25.
He's 25. Okay.
He did bring up a very interesting point that I actually happen to agree with. He said, typically for hockey players and in general of athletes in general themselves, 25 going on 26, that's when you're legitimately hitting your prime. And Draisaitl is only a year older. I have a feeling that McDavid can play even better than he did last season. And believe it or not, they actually do have a solid top six to top nine forward group because Nuge, Nuge is actually he's a pretty good player. Hyman was a phenomenal acquisition for that team. In my personal opinion, their defense isn't the greatest, but they have some young, solid pieces uprising. Uh, I mean, Barry is Barry, CC is CC. I mean, those are kind of just like middle of the road guys. Darnell Nurse, I mean, personally, I'm not a huge fan of his, but I think if Jack Campbell stays healthy, I think this team can do some damage in the regular season, which is exactly why I have them finishing second again.
Yeah, I like Edmonton a lot too. And, again, the one thing I've said about Edmonton for years now is that they got to get themselves a goaltender. Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen is not going to cut it. And hey, credit to Ken Holland. He went out there and, he brought in Jack Campbell, who had a very good year in Toronto last season, a very good year in Toronto last season, 1 year. So I'm not going to say that he's going to come in and be the savior that this team needs. They're still going to make the playoffs. I have them pinpointed at third in the division right now. Yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at with them. I just look, who's a better team, the Maple Leafs with Jack Campbell last year or the Oilers with Jack Campbell this year? And I think it's the Leafs. And I don't really think, it's particularly close. So I think everyone should just pump the brakes on the Oilers a little bit, unless McDavid and Draisaitl just go into absolute beast super god mode come the season. And they have I'm talking like 160 to 180 point season, around something like that. I just don't see them taking that major step forward to bring them from where they were last year, where they ended up last year, to where they want to be. If they were to meet Colorado again in the Western Conference Final, is it really going to be anything of a different story? I can't really sit here with the roster they have and say it would be. But again, that could totally backfire in my face. But I still have them making the playoffs, and I'm going to have them at third behind Calgary. And I think it'll be close, 2-3, very close.
Okay, that's actually pretty interesting. So you have them third, I have them second, and you had the Flames second.
That's right.
So let's move on to the LA Kings, which this is a very interesting team going into this season because they have a lot of young high-end players. And they're going into the last year of Jonathan Quick's contract with Cal Peterson as his backup, who is still there's a very small percentage that he's unproven. There's very snippet. The exact word I'm trying to look for is escaping me. But he's not an all the way proven NHL starter yet, and he has 2 years after this, also at $5 million, which could potentially come back to bite them in the ass. Time will tell. But I mean, hey, they did get Kevin Fiala this season. Philip Deneau played extremely well last season. They have literally Quentin Byfield behind Anze Kopitar and Deneau with some good guys like Alex Iafallo and Adrian Kempe, along with Victor Arvidsson. And the only thing that really gets me about this team, or I'm not all the way in on this team. I mean, Doughty's good, but he's not the same defenseman that he was. And the rest of their decor is kind of just okay.
Yeah, Shades, that's what gets me about the Kings is their defensive core and their goaltending. I think I'll, combine the two of them together. I think Drew Doughty's still very good. I still think he's very much a capable number one defenseman. But after that, you look at Sean Dursey, Brant Clark, on the back end as well. Michael Anderson, Sean Walker, Matt Roy. These are just unproven guys, and I'm just not sure how well they're going to mold into the top six. And when push comes to shove, come playoff time, are they going to fold under the pressure? Are they going to be able to keep themselves above water in this really difficult Pacific Division? But then I look at the young guys, and I look at Kopitar, and I look at Quentin Byfield and how much of a mentor he could potentially be, to the number 3 overall pick of a couple of years ago. I look at Alex Turcotte, who hasn't really come into his own. I look at Gabe Velarde, who they're still looking to get a little bit more out of. Arthur Kaliev was drafted
Yep.
in the second round. He can, rifle the puck with the best of them. Victor Arvidsson, I think a lot of people forget Arvidsson is a king now. Philip Deneau is one of the best two-way centers in the league. I didn't even mention Kevin Fiala, who I absolutely gloated about when I was talking about the Minnesota Wild. Shades, I know it sounds ballsy to say this.
I had a feeling this was going to be your first team.
But I'm going to take the Kings to win the Pacific. And I know it's wild, but I'm going to take the Kings to win the Pacific, and I'm not going to go back on it. I just think when you have the influx of youth and veteran talent that they do, and you have a division in the Pacific that's just a little bit topsy-turvy for me, there's not that clear-cut number one. I don't have that faith in Edmonton. I like what Calgary did on paper, but there's been a lot of teams in the last few years I've loved what they've done on paper, and then they go and shit the bed in the regular season. And I see this Kings team as a team that performed really well last year and just needed a little bit more time to get themselves in better playoff position, and maybe they would have gone farther than they did. And I see this as a real prime opportunity for them to take this division in a year where positions are not necessarily solidified at this point. But that could backfire so far on me, but I'm going to go a little bit bold. That's my boldest prediction for who's going to win a division, but I'm going to take the Kings.
Yeah, like you said, this team is going to go as far as the young players take them, assuming the veterans hold up like they did and played well like they did last year. Specifically, Kopitar, Deneau, and Doughty. So you have them finishing first. I have them as a wild card team.
Okay.
Which might be
that's fair.
That might be a little harsh, but like we both said, there's a lot of unproven players there.
There are. Yeah.
Now, moving on to the team that finished fourth last year, the Vegas Golden Knights. This is a team that was pretty much destroyed by injuries last year. And I mean destroyed by injuries last year, which is probably the only reason that they missed the playoffs to begin with, because Eichel was out pretty much most of the season. Stone was out for a long time. Pietrangelo, if I remember correctly, he was out for a while. I'm pretty sure Martinez missed time. Shea Theodore, I don't remember if he missed time or not, but I'm pretty sure he was the only one that was like fully healthy last season, if I remember correctly. And didn't Smith and Marchessault also miss a couple games here and there? They were injured to shit last year.
Yeah, no, they definitely they went through a lot of injury trouble last season, but that's not really going to change where I necessarily have them positioned. I have them fourth. I had them fourth last year, fourth this year. Hey, I'm saying this as I work for Vegas, I work for the organization. I don't really like how they kind of run things. I don't like what they did with Marc-Andre Fleury. I don't like the trade of Max Pacioretty, how you just traded him to Carolina for nothing. Also gave away one of your best young defensemen in Chris Coghlan to Carolina for absolutely nothing. It's just poor asset management. And yes, they have Jack Eichel, but he's also a little bit of a wild card. I don't know how healthy that neck is. He looked good towards the end of last year. He was looking, a little bit like the Jack Eichel that we remember from Buffalo, but it's a tough injury, to kind of perfect and make your way 100% of the way back from. And I'm just not sure if Eichel has the ability to do that. And I don't know if Phil Kessel replacing Max Pacioretty in your top six is going to help you place better than you did last year. And you lost some defensive depth on the blue line. There is no Robin Leonard this year, so it's just Logan Thompson. I don't know. There's questions on the back end. There's questions with the goaltending. There's questions in the top six. I like Bruce Cassidy coming in and taking over the head coaching duties, but that's about it as far as what I like about what the Golden Knights have done this offseason. So they'll make the playoffs, but I don't have them placing in the division top three.
Now, I do have the Golden Knights as the fourth seed and a wild card spot, and here's why. There was, amidst all the injuries, which is where the main focus went with this team last year, Robin Leonard did not have a good season last year.
He didn't.
Which is that's arguably more of a factor of why they missed the playoffs down the stretch. because his I don't have his exact save percentage up, but it was not good. I'm actually going to look this up right now. His save percentage total overall last season was a 907.
Yeah, that's rough. That's
Now, granted, that was probably dragged down by the second half of the season where he had like an 8 something, but you have Logan Thompson and Laurent Brossoit along with Aiden Hill. Now, Aiden Hill, I mean, he's a proven backup. Well, he's proven that he's not a starter, that is a shoe in for a backup spot. Logan Thompson was an interesting one last year because I remember I picked him up in fantasy towards the tail end of last season, and he was actually not bad. So if he can maintain probably a 9-10 save percentage along with Brossoit, who's most likely going to be the backup, I can see this team making the playoffs just off of average goaltending if they stay healthy.
as can I, but that's a major if they can stay healthy. And
well, here's the thing. I thought with all the injuries last year, I thought that was an anomaly with just how injured they were.
that's fair enough. That's fair. I mean, we're gonna see what this true Golden Knights roster is really made of, and if all these stark decisions that this upper management group has made is going to pay off. And I just can't sit here and say that it's going to pay off right now if we're doing our prediction episode. But again, Logan Thompson I like a lot. Don't get me wrong, and I like Laurent Brossoit as well. And if they can stay healthy, they definitely have a chance. And I will instill that confidence and say that they'll place fourth, like where you have them, and then they'll make the wild card.
I actually made a mistake. I actually have them third. I had the Kings fourth.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to correct myself there. So yeah, like I said, I see them on them staying healthy. Is that even considered bouncing back?
I guess not. Right.
I honestly, I think, like I said, I thought last year was an anomaly with the amount of injuries. So you have them fourth. I have them third. Let's move on to the Canucks. Now, I've been hearing all offseason how this team is being slept on. This team is being slept on. And I kind of fell into that hype for a little bit, but then I realized I wouldn't put them above the Flames for obvious reasons. I wouldn't put them above the Oilers because the Oilers finished with 9 more wins than they did. The Kings, like we said, are going to be a very interesting team. The Knights, I think, are going to make the playoffs just because last year, like we said, with all the injuries was an anomaly. And people are saying all offseason, people are sleeping on the Canucks. They might make the playoffs. They might. Granted, I have them as the first team out of the playoffs. I have them just missing the second wild card spot because the team didn't really change much from last season, in my opinion.
Yeah, they brought in Ilya Mikheyev, right, from Toronto, a big 4-year free agent contract. But that's about it. They traded away Jason Dickinson yesterday, added a second-round pick to it just to get his cap off the books. Yeah, again, the team hasn't really changed much. I will give you that. But with that said, I think people are sleeping on the Canucks. I think if you're talking about bad years that might have been an anomaly, I think last year for Vancouver was an anomaly. I think after Bruce Boudreau took over behind the bench, you saw a real change in this team. And if you remember correctly, if I remember correctly, rather, time just ran out on the Canucks for them to make the playoffs. I feel like if they had an extra 7 to 10 games in the season, I feel like they could have snuck themselves into one of those wild card spots and they could have made a run and we could, be having an entirely different conversation about them right now. Remember, they're 2 years removed from being in the Western Conference semifinals in the bubble, right? When they beat Vegas, right? And then we're going way back now. And then they lost to Vegas, excuse me. But again, my point is Vancouver is a team that's not too far away. I think that they are actually going to take that second wild card spot.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, I am looking up the 2020 Stanley Cup playoff bracket. They lost
beat Wild in the opening round.
Oh, wow, I forgot. They did the reseeding. I forgot about that.
Yeah, they did the reseeding, yep.
They beat St. Louis in the first round 2 years ago and then lost to Vegas in 7.
Right. That was
Yeah.
when Demko went absolutely batshit crazy
Yeah, and then
and Vegas couldn't score.
yeah, and then we fucking had Dallas in the fucking final. What a waste.
Yeah, what a waste. What a
Yeah,
waste.
but like yeah. But hey, don't get me wrong. Vancouver has some nice pieces. I'm not a huge fan of their defense core. Love Quinn Hughes. I think Ekman Larson is overrated. Myers is a decent defenseman, and Dermott is a decent defenseman. Other than that, I mean, there's not much there on
Yeah,
defense.
no.
And outside of their top 6 forward group, I guess you have Pod Colson,
Yep, that's
Tanner
it.
Pearson, but I mean, there's not too much there compared to the other teams ahead of them in the division, which is exactly why I have them finishing 5th again. But
Okay.
but I could see them being a team to make the playoffs because nothing ever goes right in my predictions. I could see them literally as the one team that is going to make the playoffs out of the teams that I don't have making the playoffs.
I gotcha.
All right. Moving on. Come on, computer stop. All right. San Jose Sharks. This is I love how this is a completely different conversation. The top 5 teams compared to the bottom 3 teams, even though it's just like, I don't know what the hell the Sharks are. I really don't know what they are. I mean, they still have a bunch of good players. They still have Couture. They still have Meyer. They have Hurdle. Who the fuck is their goalies again?
Reimer?
Capo Kakinen and James
Reimer and
Reimer.
Kakinen?
That's not terrible. They still have
Yeah, I
Erik
like
Karlsson.
Kakinen.
I mean, Erik Karlsson, he's not what he once was, but he's still okay. He's still decent, at least offensively. Kevin LeBanc is still there. I mean, jeez. Yeah, and this team is not headed to the playoffs. I can tell you that for sure. But the only problem with this team is, are they going to get good goaltending and not finish near the basement of the league? That's pretty much the only question I have about this team. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're headed towards the basement of the league. And, you talk about a team that's an anomaly, right? I think the Sharks definitely fit that bill. I mean, there is talent on this team. You have Erik Karlsson, who's still pretty good, but he's making $11.5 million. So he's not $11.5 million good. You have Logan Couture, who's still a number 1 center. You have William Eklund, who was drafted very high up in his draft year just a couple of years back. He's a big time prospect. So I think it's just about developing the rookies, trying not to finish in the basement of the league. But if you talk about a team that could finish last, win the draft lottery, draft Connor Bedard, and have a nice turnaround in the next couple of years, San Jose could be that team. Just one of those teams that's close, needs a generational talent to turn things around, and could just be bad enough, in order to get some luck on their side and bring in Bedard. But again, that's kind of where they're at. Their goaltending is a question mark. I like Kakinen. I like them very much in Minnesota. I thought it was a little bit of an interesting deal for Minnesota to trade away their goaltending depth that they didn't have a lot of to San Jose. I believe they got Jacob Middleton back in that deal, a defenseman. Yeah, Reimer, again, a veteran. They're going to be out of the playoffs come the trade deadline, so there's going to certainly be some pieces that they can trade off. And that's just kind of where I'm at with them, just mediocre, and they just need a shot of life in the arm, and the draft lottery could provide that.
This is true. Let's. You know what? I'm gonna put them 7th.
You put them 7th.
Yeah, I'm gonna put them 7th.
That's interesting. I'm gonna put them 7th. No, so it comes down to Seattle or San Jose. I think San Jose is gonna be worse, so I'm gonna put them 8th because I have Anaheim finishing 6th. I really like what Anaheim's done. So spoiler.
Same. I also have them finishing 6th, and let's go into why. Decent. I mean, they have honestly a number of young, skilled forwards. I mean, Zegras is one of them. Troy Terry, Max Jones,
Yep.
Mason McTavish is only 19.
Yep.
I don't see him hitting his stride just yet, but they have a very interesting top 4 defense: Klingberg, Fowler, Shattenkirk, and Dmitry Kulikov. They
I
also
like
have Jamie
that.
Drysdale, the young 20-year-old prospect who was drafted 6th overall 2 years ago.
That's right. He was.
Yeah. The only
Your
thing,
memory served you well.
yeah, once in a while. So my only problem with them is, I mean, outside of the young talent, and I mean, the top four defense isn't great. I wouldn't put them in a top 10 conversation or anything, but I mean, they do have guys like Comtois and Lundstrom along with those guys. I mean, they signed Vetrano and Strome. I actually really like the Vetrano signing for them. I mean, there's just not much there though. And especially the goaltending. 3 years ago, give me John Gibson on my fantasy team any day of the week. He's not the same goalie. Now, granted, this could be because Anaheim fell off a cliff, but I mean, he's finished with a 9-0, a low 9-0 the last 3 years. I
Yeah,
mean,
Gibson. He has.
and the problem here's Gibson's career the last 3 years. Great in the first half of the season, bad in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind
It's
of it kind of inflates their place where they finish in the division, which is why I have them finishing 6th again.
right. It almost seems that, when they drop out of the playoff race, Gibson's, statistics tend to fall along with that.
Yep.
Right. It tends to team. And again, I love John Gibson too. Again, you took the words right out of my mouth. Going back 3 years ago, I'd be very hard pressed to find a few goaltenders that I would take over John Gibson in the NHL. I like Strome. I think Strome's gonna, bring a lot from what he did in New York. I think he can be a top six, player for them. I like Vetrano as well. He can provide much of the same. Remember, they don't have Sonny Milano anymore, who is still somehow on the free agent market. Got released from his PTO last week. But yeah, brought in an influx of veterans. Jamie Drysdale on the back end. I really like the addition of Klingberg. I think that they could make things interesting in the wild card, but that's about as far as I have them going, making things but missing out on the playoffs. Maybe next year, though, when we're having this conversation, they could definitely be in play for a top 3 spot in the Pacific.
Yeah, and also with them, it depends where they are at the trade deadline and which direction they choose to go.
Exactly. And then that's a lot of question marks for them, come the trade deadline. A lot going to depend on where they're at.
Yep. And let's move on to the Seattle Kraken. Granted, they finished 8th in the Pacific last year, and I have them finishing 8th again because, I mean, one, I look at their goalie tandem right now, and yikes. Drieger, he's injured. Martin Jones is not a quality goaltender. Grubauer proved that he was not a true number one this past season. While they did add guys like Andre Burakovsky and Oliver Bjorkstrand, who I actually, those are two players that if they were going to a championship winning team, I'd be like, very good moves. But it's Seattle. Like they're literally in year 2.
Yeah, year 2.
Yeah. And while they do have some decent pieces, it's just this team is at least a year away from taking a major step forward.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with them as well. I like the pieces that they're adding. I think, slowly but surely in free agency with expansion teams, especially, you just need to add guys that are going to be complements to the roster that they're putting out consistently. And I think when you bring in guys like Bjorkstrand, a guy who plays a very good two-way game to help mentor some of the young guys like Shane Wright, who's going to be coming in, like Matty Beniers, who looked really good toward the end of last year. So for me, a lot of it depends on the goaltending and a lot of it depends on the ability to score goals. I don't think they're going to have a lot of trouble scoring. I don't think they're going to have a lot of trouble, finding that chemistry, especially within the forward group. But can they keep the puck out of their net? That's my issue. That's why I have them finishing 7th, only ahead of San Jose.
Yeah. The reason I had them finishing behind San Jose is because I like San Jose's goaltending better.
Right, that's fair
reason.
enough. And a lot of reason why I took San Jose at 8th is because they're the only team in the NHL at 0-2, so they're already behind the 8 ball a little bit. So, just pinpoint them for last since they're already there. But yeah, that's where I have Seattle. I like what they're building, though. Don't get me wrong. I like what they're building.
All right.
Get a
And
super in there. Get a real goaltender in there. We can have a conversation.
yeah, basically. Yeah, and that wraps up the Pacific Division.